welcome to episode 10 of the Music Crypt with Dan Montgomery. How you doing today, Dan?
Good. How are you, Jason?
I'm doing great, and today we're going to be talking about Iron Maiden for a couple of reasons. Number one, 2021 marks the 40th anniversary of the album Killers, which is the band's second album, and to give people a time frame of when this album came out, it was February 2nd, 1981. And again, the reason we're talking about this album today is not necessarily because it's my favorite album, but it's 40th anniversary of the album, and I think it's worth talking about. It's kind of interesting because, like most people, Dan, I'm much more of a fan of the Bruce Dickinson era, but I do have an appreciation of for what came before. So let's get right into it, Dan. Tell the story of how you first became a Maiden fan.
It was actually by mistake.
Yeah.
I was going through one of those things where I was just looking at album covers.
Wow, interesting. Yeah.
And I'm like, I really like the look of these album covers. I don't know who they are.
Yeah.
But this was the point where Killers was out, and so I bought Iron Maiden and Iron Maiden Killers at the same time.
Interesting.
Went home and slapped them on and became a fan.
Well, I have kind of a similar story, a little different in the sense that I remember as a teenager being in a record store. Yes, folks, there used to be places you could go and buy music, in your local mall and that. But anyways, the album for me was Number of the Beast, and very much like you're saying, I remember not even knowing who Iron Maiden was, never having heard the band before I stepped into the record store that day. I was just going through, what they had in there, and came across this album, Number of the Beast, and it very much like you and I have discussed before with Kiss, the cool Kiss album covers. I was drawn to this album cover. Again, knowing nothing about the band, I just saw that cool looking Eddie, the mascot on the cover, not even knowing what that was. And I thought, wow, I was just so drawn to it. I said, man, what is this? And as we get into Maiden, it's very interesting because I think what really shows the strength of the band, if you look at their career overall, is there's not one. I mean, this is not a band of pretty boys, in the sense that there's not one Maiden album cover you're going to find the band on the front cover of the. They always put the band's photo like on the back of the album, which is kind of very different for a lot of bands. But because they had such, especially with Derek Riggs, the original artist that designed Eddie and that, I mean, they had such great album covers that a lot of times people were just drawn to the band because of the album cover art.
Yeah, they wanted to see what Eddie was going to do next.
Yeah, and see, Eddie very much like Iron Maiden was ever evolving. I mean, Eddie looked very different on each of the album covers, but you never knew what you were going to get, and it very much like Kiss, although they're a very different type of band. They had the look and the sound down, if you know what I mean.
Yes, absolutely, they did, and I don't think when Paul Diano was with them that they did a big, huge world tour.
Yeah, and part of the reason for that is
like they did when they did Number of the Beast,
Yeah, part of the reason for that is that at that time Maiden was much bigger in their home country of England, and they'd had some success with the first album here in the States, but they were not at that time as big as they are now, obviously. And I think it wasn't even until Killers that they got to go on their first major U.S. tour, And so let's get into the album a little. What are some of your favorite tracks off of the Killers album?
Off the Killers album?
Yeah.
I'd have to say, I like Killers, obviously.
Uh-huh.
Genghis Khan is cool.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole album is just... it's excellent.
I mean...
This is probably one of the only cases...
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Except for maybe an occasional track off of the first album.
Yeah.
Where their second album was actually better than their first.
Interesting, yeah. And,
but I kind of think, Remember Tomorrow, Phantom of the Opera, Transylvania, Strange World.
Running Free,
like
yeah.
Charlotte the Harlot, stuff like that is just, is classic.
And what's interesting about Iron Maiden at this time is, again, Steve Harris, it's kind of his band. He's a founding member, and he wrote the bulk of this stuff. Even on Killers, there's only one track that was co-written by Paul Diano, where very different band again, but you can almost kind of compare it to The Who in the sense that Pete Townshend's, the guitar hero and the guy that writes all the hits and Roger Daltrey's kind of a voice, if you will. Paul Di'Anno is much more influenced by punk. If you listen to those first two albums, there's very much a punk element to what they were doing at the time. And I think at that time, but first two albums, the band's kind of trying to find their sound, if you will.
And they were kind of raw sounding. You know, they had it's kind of like we were like, well, you know, you're comparing them to Kiss. Like Kiss did in their first three albums.
Oh.
Kind of raw, kind of just rock and roll. You know, and these guys were just heavy metal.
I mean, I don't understand, like, as a Kiss fan, you know, talking a little bit about Kiss, why those albums didn't sell at the time. I mean, especially, like, you listen to the first album or Hotter Than Hell. I mean, those are such raw-sounding albums. I dare say those are, you know, some of the closest things to, like, metal that Kiss ever did. I mean, especially, like, on Hotter Than Hell, you have a song like Parasite or Strange Ways. You know, I was having a discussion with somebody about Kiss that, you know, well, I don't think you can call Kiss a metal band. They're if you go all the way back to the debut album, there's stuff from all the way back, you know, in the 70s that you could kind of say, well, that's leaning a little towards metal. I mean, even something like, you know, Deuce or Strange Ways or Parasite. I mean, Kiss, that's one thing they've had. They've been a band that's kind of, they've got something for everybody. You know, and getting back to Maiden, like, there's a track on here, but track that kind of opens it that I kind of dig. It's called The Ides of March. And that's one of these tunes. I think it's a great tune to kind of open the album with, because it leads right into Wrathchild. And if you listen to The Ides of March, it's the type of music I would describe as kind of like what you'd march into battle with, you know. And see, if you listen to some of the stuff, like, or pretty much any Iron Maiden album, there's elements, like on these albums, like I said, of punk, there's elements of, like, almost classical music, if you can believe it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's all kind of gone to a theme. You know, it started off where, you know, like in the first album, not so much.
Yeah.
But the second album, it started to come to form. And then when it hit Number of the Beast, you started seeing him, like, writing more of, like, how do I say it?
Well, more complicated, yeah.
Like, yeah, way more complicated, way more historic, war type. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well,
and then he had that galloping bass line, you know, where it sounded like you were on a freaking war horse the whole time.
Yeah, I mean, and Steve Harris is very interesting cat, because, like I said, he's a founding member, of a leader of the band. He writes most of his stuff for Maiden, and very much like Geezer Butler, you know, in Black Sabbath. I mean, the bass player was basically the architect, the anchor of all these great songs we have. And what's interesting, I was reading, like, a couple of these songs are based, for example, on stuff like an Edgar Allan Poe poem or something. Who would ever think to do that, you know? I mean, this guy finds influences in all kinds of things when he writes his music. And I was reading, when it came time to do Number of the Beast, I guess, he started writing more complicated stuff. And I was reading where producer Martin Birch says, he goes, we kind of thought that Paul Di'Anno could maybe handle this stuff, but of course when they decided to bring Bruce Dickinson in the band, they said he's got the voice for it. You know, we didn't know that Paul Di'Anno would be able to handle everything of what Steve was writing at the time, you know. And I do think he has somewhat of a limited voice. I mean, like, if you go back to these first two main albums, he's great at what he did. But if you sit there and you're honest with yourself, if Paul Di'Anno was, like, even half the vocalist that Bruce Dickinson is, he would have gone on to have a huge solo career. And sadly enough, you know, he didn't.
Yeah, it didn't really work out.
Yeah.
I got a cool track from him. He's on an album with Michael Fichtner.
Oh, cool.
It's called Michael Fichtner and Friends.
Okay.
And he does a cover of, I think it's Hair of the Dog.
Interesting. Yeah,
it's really cool. And, I mean, you can still hear him, you know, he's still got that
growly
growl to his voice that just made it.
And I got to say that I really haven't heard another vocalist, you know, like him. So he is really great at what he does. There's no denying that, because 40 years later, we're talking about, you know, this album he did with slow band Maiden called, you know, Killers. And again, people may love Maiden with Bruce Dickinson, but that's where it all began. So you got to nod your head to the guy. and it.
They wonder, like we were kind of talking before we went on, what would have happened if they didn't pull in Bruce?
Yeah, and
would they have gotten kind of like, would they have only made like another record?
Yeah, who knows?
And then they just kind of shut down because they didn't really change.
Yeah.
Or with those lyrics that Harris was writing still carry him through,
Yeah, and see, even on future Maiden albums, I mean, from time to time you'll see a Bruce Dickinson writing credit, but most of the stuff is written by Steve Harris. And so, again, as great of a vocalist as Bruce Dickinson is, he's kind of Steve.
He's just a loudspeaker.
Yeah, exactly. He's the one that delivers the song, so to speak.
Exactly.
And he does a great job of it. And see, the thing with a guy like Bruce Dickinson is he can sing everything from a beautiful ballad to he can like knock you over your head with his. I mean, people when they talk about Bruce Dickinson, okay, you usually hear in reference to like how high the guy can scream. You hear him in conversations about like I hear people say, oh, he's in my top 3 of all-time favorite vocals. People list like Halford, Dickinson, Dio. I mean, so that's good company to be in,
Yeah, absolutely.
And see, that's the thing. Like, if you've checked out any of Bruce's solo albums, some of his solo albums, they weren't as successful, but I think the solo work he did really has stood the test of time in the sense that a lot of that stuff as a solo artist, I think part of the reason he did those albums, he wanted to kind of do something different. He was a little more experimental. He didn't have to necessarily go in and say, okay, I got to make this sound like a Maiden album. He could kind of go in there and do whatever he wanted. And I think the fans were kind of accepting of that. Whereas, I don't know if you ever heard, but there's a song off his second solo album, Tears of a Dragon. It's like it's a great power ballad, but man, he rips it. He does a great job with that. And again, just talking about these albums, like okay, Killers. I was reading. Okay, on the U.S. Billboard chart, this is interesting. It charted as high as 78. Now, in the U.K. chart, where they're from, in England, it was a little higher. It charted at number 12. And it's kind of interesting. I did a show the other day about talking about Bruce Dickinson and his solo career. And it's interesting. A lot of the albums, for whatever reason, maybe because of, again, Bruce and Iron Maiden from England, it's interesting that a lot of the albums charted higher in England than they did here in the U.S. And I don't know if that has anything to do with. I hear people talk all the time about a lot of times European metal fans, they're a lot more supportive of the bands they like than the American fans. I don't know why that is.
Right. Well, that's even today.
Yeah, even today.
You're going to get way more support if you're going to do a world tour in Europe.
Yeah.
Than if you try to do a U.S. tour.
Yeah, even a guy like Blackie Lawless, I mean, he hardly tours here in the U.S. anymore, and I'm talking pre-COVID. A lot of times you read about he does these big European festivals, and why wouldn't you? I mean, he's able to do like maybe 3, 4, 5 shows a year and make bank,
Freaking 100,000 people show up at one show.
Yeah.
It's a little different than, a couple thousand show up here and there.
And again, if all Paul Di'Anno had ever done was Iron Maiden, I mean, he's more of an interesting footnote in metal history. I mean, what a thing to be known for, those first 2 albums. I mean, those are albums that really launched Maiden into what they're doing today. And the interesting thing, Maiden is, like we were talking about prior to doing the show today online, Dan, Maiden's really accomplished world domination. I mean, they got a huge worldwide fan base that they got a fan base on the levels of like a Kiss, I would say, because very much like Kiss, Maiden, anything they put out, the fans buy. And it's not just here in the U.S. or in England where they're from. I mean, Maiden has been to places like Russia, Mexico, and other countries, and they're big pretty much wherever they go.
Yeah, for sure.
And I'm interested to see what they do next. I mean, a lot of people have been locked down for the last year, but even last year they put out like a live album that was recorded in Mexico, and at this point they've done so many live albums, but people still buy. But I have to say that probably my all-time favorite live album they put out would have to be the one from 1985, Live After Death.
Live After Death.
And I don't know if it's because it was recorded in Long Beach, where I'm from, here in California, but
yeah, I think that was like recorded over like 2 days, 2 shows.
at the Long Beach Arena. And an interesting thing too, to me, I don't know why I keep comparing them to Kiss because they sound nothing like. But they got that kind of fan base, and I think if you go back to that live album, Live After Death,
a huge show for them.
It was, if you put that on, it sounds so like live and in your face. You feel like you were there.
Yeah. I remember when that thing came out, I think for Christmas time, I got that, and I got the VHS tape of the concert. And I would just, watch that so many times that I couldn't even watch it anymore. That was such a good album.
And
they did an awesome job.
And at this point, as we sit here and talk, 40 years later about this album, both Bruce Dickinson and Nico McBrain have been Maiden, longer than Paul Di'Anno or Clive Burr ever were. But it's interesting listening to this album because I was listening to the album prior to doing this today, and one thing that's really obvious to me, especially on Killers, that I never really paid attention to before, what I noticed more than anything is the thunder-like drumming from Clive Burr. It's sad, this guy, he only did 3 albums with Maiden, and then I think part of the reason he didn't do too much is, as you know, a few years ago he died from Parkinson's disease, so I think early on that might have had to do with why he, left the band or whatever, and I think it affected his playing, obviously, so that's kind of sad to think that, but again, he plays on those 3. If you had to play on only 3 albums in your life, I mean, those are some great albums to be.
3 to play on right there.
Yeah, I mean, I think you could die. In this guy's case, I think he was able to die saying, "Okay, I did something with my life."
Yeah, for sure.
But it also saddens you to think the potential this guy could have had. And now it's interesting. Nico McBrain has been in the band longer than Clive Burr ever was, but a lot of people, becoming Maiden fans maybe later in life, they don't even realize there was a drummer before Nico McBrain. And very much kind of like.
What's kind of funny is I keep forgetting that Nico's in the band.
Yeah. He's like the.
Oh yeah, Clive Burr. Oh, that's right. He's not there no more.
Yeah. And Nico's a great.
I'm still stuck in the 80s, I guess, but.
Nico's a great drummer, but I think part of that is that he's of all the guys in the band, he's such a quiet guy, and even Steve Harris, he does a lot of interviews, and Bruce do a lot of interviews, but even Steve Harris is a little more quiet of a guy, but he's like one of those quiet geniuses that, like, he doesn't say much, but when he does, people listen.
Yeah, no doubt there.
And you were sharing me when we were coming up with the idea a few weeks ago to do this show that you say, I'm a Maiden fan, and people can obviously hear that in your voice, but you say, somewhere along the way, I'm not as big of a fan as I used to be. Why do you think that is?
For me, I think it just, not that they stayed the same.
Yeah.
Because they changed, but they didn't really change.
It didn't evolve.
I mean, they're a freaking awesome band.
Yeah.
I'd never say nothing
bad about them.
They were not, worthy of being where they should be.
And I think at their age, like, I couldn't.
But like, say, I'm looking at like their list of albums right now, and it's like.
I haven't had a good one in quite a while.
They're all really good until I think maybe Seventh Son.
Okay, interesting.
That's when I kind of started tapering off of the Iron Maiden thing.
Now that's interesting because that would be Adrian Smith's last album with the band until him and Bruce came back to do Brave New World, which I think was a great comeback album. But and I don't know if they made a great album maybe since Brave New World. I think part of that is the excitement of Adrian and Bruce coming back to the band. And now, did you get a chance to hear those 2 albums that Adrian Smith played on, those 2 Bruce Dickinson solo albums? Because that was pretty good stuff.
No, I didn't actually hear those.
Yeah. You should, when you get a chance, even maybe go on YouTube and, like, the one I really strongly recommend you check out is called Accident of Birth. And it's kind of like a classic kind of Maiden sound, but I think of all Bruce's solo albums, that's probably the most focused to my ears. And see, that's kind of they did that, and then another album, Chemical Wedding, which was a Bruce solo album, and then they both decided to go back to Maiden. Kind of interesting they would do those 2 albums before returning to Maiden. Yeah, and so I just think Maiden overall, no matter what they do, I mean, they're still able to put out, new music whenever they decide to do it. It's been a while, and I hear maybe Priest and Maiden are going to do a tour together next year. So, because Priest was supposed to go on their 50th anniversary tour, so I think what giants of like British rock, that would be a great tour.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. If they're going to do it, they might as well, I guess they really couldn't with Ozzy's current condition, but...
See, I think that had to do...
That'd be freaking awesome to see, like, Sabbath and Iron Maiden and Judas Priest all in one show.
Yeah, I mean, they almost... I mean, a few years ago, maybe it's been at least probably 10, 15 years now, but they had that Ozfest where Judas Priest opened up for Sabbath. And I thought that was kind of cool. But, Maiden, too, they're getting up there in age. But I'll tell you, they're one band that seems to be able at that age to still get up there and kick ass. I mean, I seen a picture where Bruce Dickinson looks old as hell. He's 65 or something, but, man, he still looks like the metal god that he is.
and he's able to use his available range.
Yeah.
He doesn't try to sing like he did back in Never the Beast.
Yeah.
He doesn't try to go for those freaking same high octave, same high tones. Same with Rob Halford,
Yeah.
It's like, I know I can't hit those high ones, but I can hit these ones.
Yeah, and speaking of Halford and Dickinson, I don't know if on the first Halford album, do you remember they did that duet together with on the Resurrection album? It was called The One You Love to Hate. I mean, that they killed it on that. Yeah, that was some awesome stuff. But and so again, if you ask me what's my favorite Maiden album, I would have to say probably Number of the Beast for a lot of reasons. Probably the main one, like I told you, I remember seeing that for the first time in the record store, and I was just, because of the artwork, I was just drawn to it. And imagine, you get that album, you take it home, and you hear that was like one of those few albums where from top to bottom there was no filler. It was all killer. I mean, everything on there. And to me, that's like and it is considered all these years later a classic album, and that's one of those albums you really can't go wrong with. And you want to point somebody in the direction of Iron Maiden, that's one of the albums you would tell them, hey, that's what the band's all about. You want to know what Iron Maiden is? You listen to that.
Yeah, definitely. Pick that one up.
And that's pretty much, I think, the standard, And it's not that they've made awful albums since, and it's just. That's one for me that kind of, stood out, or that, because it had that kind of impact on me as far as just seeing it visually.
Right. I saw them on that tour, Number of the Beast, and I think they were the warm-up band.
Oh, wow.
The Scorpions.
Yeah, wow.
And I'm sure that was the last tour they ever played first on.
Yeah. That's kind of funny. I'll tell you a funny story. I was reading an interview with, this was online, with Geezer Butler, where he was talking about that when Van Halen opened up for Black Sabbath on that tour, I think it was like the last tour they did with Ozzy. Geezer was claiming that David Lee Roth, because Van Halen, all the critics were saying Van Halen was blowing Black Sabbath off stage, and Geezer was like, yeah, because David Lee Roth was trying to rip off Ozzy. Well, both Ozzy and Roth aren't the greatest singers, but I don't think Roth sounds anything, like Ozzy. In fact, he's a very unique guy. And if you talk about Ozzy, like I think Geezer Butler really was the genius behind Black Sabbath, because a lot of people don't even realize, because Ozzy's a singer, they think Ozzy wrote all that stuff. Geezer wrote all the lyrics, and again, it didn't even.
They were just the whole band on for credit.
Yeah, and it is kind of interesting if you go and you listen to those classic Black Sabbath albums. It doesn't really, to my ears, it didn't really matter how good of a singer Ozzy was or wasn't, because his voice fit those songs. His voice fit what Geezer was writing. That's where I dare say, if you listen to some of Ozzy's solo albums, he almost sounds like he became a better singer at that time. In his career, they could do all kind of studio magic. And then also, if you notice, all the guys in Ozzy's solo band, like Zakk Wylde, Randy Rhoads, these are all guys. Even Bob Daisy, these are all guys that were, great songwriters. So, again, when you have guys in your band that can write music like that, you could pretty much do anything with your voice. But I think, if you listen to Ozzy songs, he at that point in his career, he was a much better sounding singer on the records.
Yeah.
But,
Absolutely.
and that's the interesting thing about some of the metal music. You know, we grew up on, like you're talking about Sabbath and even these early Iron Maiden albums. You know, the first two, it didn't even necessarily matter that Paul Di'Anno wasn't the greatest singer in the world. His vocals for what they were doing fit that type of music.
Yeah, it was perfect for those albums.
Yeah. And
and that's kind of like we were talking, it's like, would we have had Number of the Beast
yeah.
with Paul Di'Anno?
Yeah.
Or would all of his songwriting, would it have changed because of the voice?
Yeah. I mean, I think Steve Harris would have continued to write whatever he could for Paul Di'Anno, but I don't think that Maiden wouldn't have that world domination like they do. I mean, because I think he reached a point where he thought we're pretty limited with what we could do here. And, talking a little bit more about Bruce Dickinson, I'll have you share this story because you had sent me like a video right before we did this today of Bruce Dickinson talking about this movie or something that Samson had a part in. Samson was his pre-Maiden band. And, man, it's just some of the funniest stuff I've ever seen.
That was another band that I kind of found them after, I think maybe I had gotten a hold of Number of the Beast.
Okay, wow.
So I was into making a couple, 3 albums maybe, and just kind of going to the record store and I see this album that's got these 2 football guys, like 2 helmets, like they're getting ready to clash against each other.
Yeah.
And I'm like, who the hell are these guys? And I just keep on looking by it. I pick it up again, and I flip it over, and I see this drummer with a leather mask on, and I see it says Bruce.
Wow.
And I'm like, Bruce?
Yeah.
Looks like Bruce Dickinson. So I bought it, I threw it on, I'm like, holy crap, it is.
Yeah, and again, Samson was one of those bands. A lot of people after Bruce joined Maiden would go and check that band out. Just that was the band Bruce was in, pre-Maiden, and the guitar player Paul Sampson, it was his band, but again, he never kind of reached that kind of same level of success. And I mean, I know before he died, a lot of people were kind of checking this stuff out, but he never had that kind of same success. And it's kind of interesting though. Like you said, a lot of people check out Samson because of Bruce Dickinson. But probably back in the day when you were getting that stuff, I mean, we didn't have YouTube back then, so it was a lot harder to find that stuff. You had to really go looking. You probably had to go get it ordered through an import thing or something like that. But so again,
or just find a really cool record store that didn't really care what everybody stocked.
Yeah.
That's how I think I got it. It was just like this little corner store that just had like pretty much everything.
Yeah, and that's the cool thing about YouTube now. You can pretty much go and look any of this stuff up. Even in prepping for this today, I just go on YouTube and type Killers full album, and you get a list of all the songs, and you can play them. And that's kind of a fun way to do it too, because especially if you haven't heard the music, this album Killers in a long time. I could say from my own experience, I'm listening to kind of with fresh ears, like, oh, okay, yeah, I remember this track now. I remember this, and like Wrathchild probably is my favorite song off of this album. Just I think it's a perfect kind of song to kind of kick it off with, after an instrumental. Genghis Khan, that's a cool one, and Killers. I don't know what else to say, but it's just pretty much a great album, and I think it's one of those albums that people kind of forget about. And I was reading on YouTube all the stuff people are commenting. They're saying, man, this is my favorite Maiden. I love what they did with Bruce, but as far as the stuff they did with Di'Anno, I think that, very much like you were saying, this is their best album. And I think it's those first 2 albums people need to really just kind of remember. That's where the band got their start. And I do say what Di'Anno gave is he I think he brought his punk influence into the band. And see, that's another thing too. Would Maiden, if they'd continued with him, would they be considered a metal band or more of a punk band? I don't know.
Yeah, I guess it would just depend on which direction they went. Because at the end of Killers, they were still at the same place they were when they started.
Yeah, and
they were heading down this road,
Yeah, and,
I think if they had made another album with Paul,
yeah.
it would have been another killer freaking album. It would have been better than Killers.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
You know, it would have just been another step up. But I don't think they would have been able to go maybe too much further.
Yeah, and see, Maiden's one of those bands too. It's very unique situation where you have the replacement singer becomes much more popular than the original guy.
Yeah.
I can't really think of any other bands now. Talking a little bit about more about Maiden, I want to talk a little bit about their recently being nominated for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and not getting into it. I mean, I remember before they announced who was getting in this year, me and a lot of other people I was talking to were like, yeah, I hope Maiden gets in, but I really doubt they will. And I really think when it comes to metal bands, the Hall of Fame, they think they know what's metal, but they don't really have a clue. I mean, even after we got backlash for Maiden not getting in, I mean, the guy who runs the Hall of Fame, he was saying stuff like, well, we've got metal bands in there, Black Sabbath's in there, Alice Cooper's in there. I mean, I think a lot of the times when they nominate these bands, it has a lot to do with what they think is metal. Like the guy, oh, Kiss is in there, Def Leppard's in there, they're metal bands. It's just
I don't really think the people running that thing really have a clue of what's going on.
I mean, I'll give you a perfect example of not having a clue. I remember a year before, Judas Priest was, they've been up two or three times at least. Judas Priest, Thin Lizzy. I was thinking, okay, Thin Lizzy, Judas Priest, they've been up two or three times. They'll probably get in this. Once again, they didn't get in. You know the band that got in? And no disrespect to them, but T-Rex. Now, when I think of T-Rex, I like some of their stuff, but let's be honest, Priest and Thin Lizzy.
Really Hall of Fame material.
But let's be honest, Priest and Thin Lizzy got a lot more hits that I can name. When you ask me T-Rex, okay, Bang and Gone. That's pretty much it.
If you look at careers, right?
Yeah.
I mean, just their live album, Unleashed in the East.
Yeah.
It's probably better than everything that T-Rex put together.
And T-Rex, I mean, I think part of the reason.
He was an excellent musician.
Yeah, part of the reason T-Rex, gets the nod and gets in probably is because Mark Bolan, the singer and the guitar player, he died tragically young. And okay, so this guy's dead. They look like they.
Because he died. No, not really.
Yeah, they look like a metal band. So oh my God, you gotta be kidding me. I would have even said maybe either Thin Lizzy or Priest, but man, and yeah, they don't even have the number of hits that the other two bands have. And then what's a joke too is like you remember when Kiss got in? I mean, there was a huge controversy because the Hall of Fame would only induct like the 4 original members, and so many fans were up in arms about that because you got like a guy like Eric Carr. He put 12 years of his life into that band. The guy died, playing the drums, and they don't even respect him enough. But then they put a guy like Bruce Dickinson, and every songwriter that Bruce ever wrote a hit with, they get in. And then you have bands like, again, like Deep Purple, where okay, we'll induct David Coverdale and Glenn Hughes. They should get in too, but the guy that was the original singer, we're not going to put him in.
Yeah, it should be the whole thing or nothing.
Yeah, they got.
Not just,
yeah.
Oh, we're going to put him in because of what they did in 1981.
Yeah, they got all these stupid rules like you gotta make your first album 25 years ago or whatever. But like, and then they got like that.
Kind of like Congress. Maybe it's just time to go flush the toilet on the people running that place.
Yeah. And then like they say, oh well, we had the fans vote. Well, I think it's still somewhat rigged because like I was reading the stuff about Maiden when they're saying, oh they're very close and we don't think Iron Maiden or the Foo Fighters. I'm like, no, the Foo Fighters are going to get in. Nothing against the Foo Fighters. I like some of what they do. Dave Grohl's a great musician, but come on, like Iron Maiden's been around a lot longer than the Foo Fighters, and they get it like their first time out. I don't know about that.
Yeah, it's just I think it's more political than it is musical.
Yeah.
It's like whatever's going to make them really popular with the public at the time. was going to get in.
Yeah, and some bands like I got to give them credit, like Kiss. I got to give credit to Gene and Paul. They told the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame because they wanted them to perform too. They're like, no, we're not gonna agree to perform unless you put, all 8 members of the band in, and they said that even about like, Vinnie Vincent, Mark St. John, these guys that didn't have a huge contribution, but they say they were part of a history. They should be included. And then they're like, no, we're only going to induct the original 4. And then Peter and Ace thought they were going to get up there and be able to perform. But I got to give it credit to the guys that no, if you're going to do that and you're not going to honor these guys, we're not going to play that game.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then
it's because it's all rigged,
Yeah.
I mean, before they put the thing out, who's going to, their little vote or whatever they put it, I was going to put in.
Yeah.
It's like wrestling.
And and the thing, when I see the list of people that are going to be nominated or up for being nominated, I can almost pick out of that list. Okay, this person's for sure going to get in, or this person's maybe going to get nominated, but they're not going to get in for whatever reason. It's very much like I don't know if you have any idea too about the Grammys, like how the Grammys get. Apparently, like how that is done is there's like a whole committee, and like if you've ever made any kind of done anything kind of in the music industry, you get on the committee, and then people actually try to like broker to get nominated. Like, hey, here's my album, check it out. And it's so a lot of that stuff has to do with who you know.
Yeah. For sure. Absolutely.
And so like even with Black Sabbath, I think when Black Sabbath got nominated, it was only the original 4. I don't even think Ronnie James Dio was inducted into that. Man, what a and he.
That's just not right because I mean we've talked about Sabbath and some of Sabbath's greatest stuff was with Dio.
Yeah, and a thing you're gonna want to check out since I know you're such a Dio fan like me is did you hear that Ronnie James Dio's long autobiography is going to come out at the end of this month? It's called Rainbow in the Dark, and I guess before he got sick he started writing it, and then his wife Wendy and this guy Mick Wall, they finished writing the book, and it's supposed to come out at the end of the month. So that's something to look forward to. So that's pretty much all I have to say about Maiden for today, unless there's anything else you can think of, Dan.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. I know there was, back when they were just starting out, when they had like the rock and roll magazines, where you get the magazine because they didn't have the internet, but that's how you could find out what was going on.
Oh yeah,
all this music,
Yeah.
And it must have been like, I'm going to say this is like maybe a couple of weeks before their very first album came out. So they had this interview in like maybe Circus or some hit parade, something like that.
Yeah.
And they were talking with Steve Harris, and he was like just really down on Geezer Butler and Sabbath.
Wow.
They're from the same town.
Yeah.
Right? And he's saying, whatever Geezer thinks he can play, I've already done it. Just saying how much of a better musician he was. And,
oh, wow.
And you're just like, what a dick.
Yeah, because, like...
and then later on, you're hearing what they're writing and the stuff that's coming out of both camps, and you're like, all right, well, maybe you had a point.
Well, I mean, at the same time, Sabbath came before Maiden, so you think to yourself, come on.
There should be some respect.
At least a little. Yeah. I mean, Geezer...
Like, he didn't give a shit about the road that had been paved before them.
Yeah.
And then, of course, later, after he became famous, he changed his tune.
Yeah, well, it's funny. I think like a lot of things with age, maybe you age better because he seems like he's much more of a level-headed guy now. Maybe who knows? Maybe when you're young and just starting out, you have that kind of cocky.
He may have had, I don't know. I mean, he kind of looks like he could be the kind of person who would have like a bad temper.
Yeah, well, he seems like he seems.
Hear anything about it. At least I never read anything about it. But he kind of looks like he could be kind of a dick.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Who knows? That would be interesting. Like even you're talking about Geezer. I was reading an interview he did recently where he was talking about and I kind of got to laugh at this because I don't know how true this is or not, but now that Ronnie's passed on, he's claiming that he's the one that came up with the devil horn thing, and that he kind of told Ronnie about it. Who knows? That would, if that's true, then whatever. But like, wow. Now, before we wrap this up, you just gave me a great idea. So I want to let the people know next time around, when Dan and I do this, we're going to be talking about, very much like we did on our episode where we talked about our favorite like live albums all the time. Dan and I are going to kind of create a list of each of our own, our favorite like guitar riffs of all time. We're going to be talking about that. And before we finally wrap it up today, I also, as we're talking, Dan, you just put a great idea in my head. Because I tell you, back in the day, before the internet, I used to collect all those rock magazines. That's the one thing I miss. I mean, today you can still like go to the local bookstore, and you got it like Barnes and Noble or something like that in your area. You can find classic rock or like Metal Hammer magazine, and those are great for what they are. But if you want to spend like $15 on a magazine, but I remember all those magazines you mentioned, like Metal Edge, Hit Parader, Circus was my, I think, all-time favorite. And then I when I knew they were on the way out was when I picked up a copy of Circus magazine, and they had an article on, if you can believe it, New Kids on the Block. I think that says it all right there. But we'll end it there. So you have a good rest of the day, Dan, and I'll talk to you real soon. I'm going to try to get this episode up within the next week or so.
Right on. Well, I'll get it up and I'll share it as well. So.
Okay, take care, buddy.